Traders, how are you? With Marcello. Today we're doing the recap of what's happening in the markets, finance, the economy, so we can take advantage of that money. This week we have a new skull that was recovered in China that's going to open the door to a completely new species living there 300,000 years ago. We also have Michael Burry, which was one of the only people that predicted the 2008 financial crash, 2009 financial crash, is now betting $1.6 billion against the market. And we also have about $1 billion liquidations in crypto. Let's go ahead and get started. Most important thing this week was the Fed meeting. The Fed is the central bank of the United States, and they kind of, let's say dictate the feeling of what the economy is. Because if they say something, for example, like, oh, we're worried about inflation, we're going to keep the interest rates high, that's not a good thing for the economy. The reason why is because we live in this over-financialized world where everything is based on debt, right? Especially after we've had the absolute lowest interest rates in the history of the world. Not the history of the US, the history of the world. So when they say that, well, we're thinking about raising again or keeping the rates higher for longer, that affects quite a bit the economy, especially in the United States, we have about almost 70% of the economy is consumer spending. So if you raise the interest rates, everything gets a lot more expensive. Houses, cars, credit card payments, everything. And that obviously moves a lot less of the economy. So that was basically what they're worried about. They're talking about the stubbornly high inflation. That means that they're talking about another possible rate hike, which means not very good news for the economy. Another worry was China's economy. They're not doing very well either. So now we have the two largest economies in the world showing negative signs, which means that we might have some headwinds coming up in the future. Overall, because of that, Michael Burry, if you don't know who he is, I recommend you watch the documentary called The Big Short, basically where a handful of guys, where nobody else was talking about it, shorted the housing market. Michael Burry, if I remember correctly, actually created a brand new vehicle with Goldman Sachs being the most important financial institution in the United States. He created a new vehicle to be able to short the market because nobody thought that the housing market could go down. So he made billions of dollars. So now he's betting 90% of his entire funds, or about $1.6 billion, with options, which are basically a fight. Let's call it, I'm not going to give you guys a trading lesson here, but it's a financial vehicle that you use to be able to have the option to sell or the option to buy certain let's call it financial markets or financial products. So he bet almost 900 million of puts, or for example, the option to go short for the S&P 500, and almost $750 million against the NASDAQ as well. So because of all the negative reaction and negative news, and of course what the Fed said, all the markets in the US were down over 2%. All of them, Canada was down over 3%. European markets, mostly negative as well. The biggest loser there was the FTSE, which was down 3.6%. Latin America was mostly lower. The Merval in Argentina, however, went up by 21.66% because they just might stop voting for communists. And then Africa and the Middle East are mixed. Africa went down by over 5%. And then we have the third negative week for Asia and the Far East, with the Hang Seng from the Hong Kong being the biggest loser there at over 6%. They're now in bear territory, meaning that the market is actually going down. The trend is down now. Bitcoin and crypto news. There was over $1 billion liquidated from crypto market in the last 24 hours from Friday, so meaning from Thursday to Friday. This started due to the fact that SpaceX sold $373 million of their crypto. SpaceX being Elon Musk's company, which also runs Starlink internet access. Brazil launched their central bank digital currency, what I've always called the government coin. They're calling it the DREX, which is basically the electronic digital real, real being the currency of Brazil, and then X to make it all fancy. Coinbase, which is the largest crypto exchange in the United States, got approval to offer crypto futures to U.S. retail customers. This is big news due to the fact that 80% of the entire crypto market 80% of it is global derivatives. So now they were essentially only working with 20% of what the entire crypto market is. Now they can function with the other 80%. And Bitcoin for the week is down over 13%. It's just a touch under 26,000 as of Saturday morning, now at a 2-month low. Commodities, very bad news for the dollar. India and the UAE completed their first oil sale in rupees. I don't think people understand how really bad this is. So the reason why the United States is the empire that it is because everybody uses it to preserve currency. And this is due to the petrodollar, where the United States essentially made an agreement with Saudi Arabia. And the kind of very macro overview of this is United States was going to defend Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia was only going to sell their oil in dollars, essentially, right? And then now it became customary. So if Brazil was going to pay China, or Canada was going to pay Brazil, or Germany was going to pay Japan, they all converted their local currency into dollars first, and then everybody used dollars for international trade. That has been going down, the percentage of dollar trade over time, especially as other economies continue to come up and get bigger. Obviously, China 20 years ago, 30 years ago, wasn't even in the top 10 largest economies in the world. But what happens if the demand for the dollar goes down, right? Because now India, which if I'm not mistaken, is the 5th largest economy in the world, 3rd or 4th largest oil importer in the world, all those dollars aren't in demand anymore. So where are those dollars going to go? Right? So all those dollars are going to come back home to roost. And what happens when you have a lot of supply of something? The value collapses, which in terms of the US dollar, that means inflation. So we might have a situation, this isn't going to happen tomorrow, right? It might happen in 6 months, and it might happen in 6 years, but we're going to have a situation where we might have 20, 50, 100% inflation literally in a year or a month, because all those dollars are going to start coming back rather than people using them. You see how that works? And it's kind of cascading over time, because now more and more countries are starting to do this. And the BRICS, which are the nations of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and then South Africa, are rumored to be starting their own reserve currency. So the percentage of the economy that these countries use is larger now than the G7. So now we have an economic bloc where they're going to start their own reserve currency, try not to use the dollar, and it's literally just going to be like just from one second to the next. So it's going to be interesting what happens to that. I think that's really bad news, especially for us in the US. Prices for cacao hit a 46-year high. Sugar has hit the highest in almost a decade. Chocolate makers Hershey and Mondelez face a high, really serious trading conditions. Now consumers are starting to not buy chocolate because of how expensive it is. The prices have gone up 20% over the last 2 years, but remember, the inflation of 3% that the government tells you is still correct. Now, the top cacao producers of Ivory Coast and Ghana have faced drought, excess rains, and disease for the last 2 years. Together, they produce almost 66% of the world's cacao. So put some chocolate in your basement. U.S. crude went down with the dollar going up as well. Obviously, if there's an expectation of the economy not doing well with this Fed meeting of them saying, well, maybe we are going to increase rates again, the expectation is that the economy isn't going to continue to grow, which means that the demand for oil is going to go down. So U.S. crude went down by over 2%, international as well, and they settled at 81.25 for the U.S. crude and then 84.80 for the Brent, which is the international crude. China's push to control the exports of a material called gallium has sent prices to a 10-month high. This, you may not know what it is, but it's one of the main materials that are used in semiconductors. And since everything now is electronic, your refrigerator even connects to the internet, this could have a really big cause on inflation, because if those prices continue to explode, everybody's on a back order for semiconductors, especially, for example, these AI chips, right? This is not a good thing when it comes to inflation. Gold went down 1.24% to $18.90 with 50 cents, while silver went up 0.43% to $22.86. And in financial and banking news, we've had another bank failure that wasn't in the news. The Kansas-based Heartland Tri-State Bank failed. They had about $139 million in assets, $130 million in total deposits during its closure. The FDIC basically grabbed them and moved them to another bank. It was, if I remember the amount correctly, it was First Republic Bank, which is the second largest bank failure in the world. That's one that happened a few months ago. This bank had 0.1% of the assets that they had. So that's probably why I didn't go notice. But as Warren Buffett said, we are getting more bank failures. United States lost $5.9 trillion in wealth last year, more than any country in the world. They were hardest hit because stocks and bonds went down, banks said. But one of the things I thought was ironic is even with all of the sanctions and all the restrictions that the West was placing on Russia, Russia's wealth actually increased. It didn't go down. Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. According to a survey, 61% of U.S. adults in June were trying to rely on their next influx of cash to be able to cover basic expenses. Bankrate is somebody that did the survey, and they said that 70% of Americans don't feel financially secure. A typical U.S. worker takes home about $3,300 a month after taxes and benefits, and their expenses can reach up to $2,800, meaning 85% of their budget is completely gone with their just main expenses, not including childcare or debt payments, for example. And thanks to the marvelous Biden administration, now every family is spending about $709 extra a month to live than what they used to before Biden came in. Netherlands has officially entered a recession. Now that's Germany and Netherlands in Europe. UK inflation eased to a 17-month low, 6.8% in July. Norway's central bank increased their rates by 0.25 or 25 basis points to 4%. And Japan's inflation data also came down. Their consumer prices went to 3.1%, which is lower than expected as well. So we have some good news on the inflation front, but remember, the inflation isn't really 3% now, is it? Political news, the National Health Service in the UK is launching a campaign, get this, to teach people about how common heart attacks are. I wonder what happened in the last few years that changed all of that, because it wasn't that common before. 7,000 plus percentage in admissions in England in 2001 and 22 compared to the previous year-long period. Wonder what changed in 2020. Argentine voters rebuked the country's two main political forces. After being the richest country in the world in the year 1900, voting for communists for 17 years and socialists, they're finally starting to vote for a libertarian. Javier Milei won 30.5% of the vote. So hopefully they'll be able to get now what they have, 4 out of 10 people in poverty and a yearly inflation rate of 116%. Can you imagine? You go to buy a cookie at the store, it costs $1. This actually happened to me during the pandemic. I would go and buy these white macadamia nut cookies where they were in a package and they were 10. And they were just like stacked with white macadamia nuts. It was just the best thing ever. And then after a while, we started noticing that they removed the cookie. So then it was 9 cookies instead of 10. Then it was 8 cookies instead of 10. And then they started removing all the white macadamia nuts. So it's like before, when there used to be, maybe 6, 7, 8, 9 in one cookie, then there was like 2 or 3 in a cookie. Kind of the same thing. So can you imagine paying like $1 a loaf of bread? I don't know what bread costs in the US today because I've been living overseas for so long, and then the next month it costs $1.10, then the next month $1.20, then the next month, it's just every month it goes up by 10, 20%. Can you imagine? That's what's coming eventually to the US. In economic news, the Japanese economy grew 6% in quarter 2 on an annualized basis, soundly beating the expectations of 3.1%. And the U.S. economy's leading economic index fell by 0.4% in July, 16th consecutive months. And so the indicators that they use to base how well the economy doing, 7 out of 10 of those have gone down. So not bueno at all. Corporate news. NVIDIA, the largest semiconductor company on market cap, rose over 7% after Morgan Stanley, which is a financial institution in the United States, said that NVIDIA remains our top pick with a backdrop of a massive shift in spending towards AI and a fairly exceptional supply-demand imbalance that should persist for the next several quarters. Stock is up almost 197% in 2023. Evergrande Group, The world's most indebted property developer officially filed for bankruptcy in the United States. In a court, they posted a $81 billion loss in the last 2 years, ending in July of this year. Now, there's another company called Country Garden, which used to be one of the China's largest developers, and they're struggling to make their payments now. So this is a problem because this can continue to be kind of like a venomous snake, venom that just kind of starts to infect the entire financial system. Because remember that China is the second largest economy in the world, and a lot of foreigners invest in their real estate. Tesla had their sixth straight session of losses, went down another 1.7%. They saw a huge losing streak that length in December when the stock tumbled for 7 consecutive days. They've had a really good number so far, but they did just drop their prices again, and the shares are up 75% in 2023. Trade news. There's a huge brewing fight between the United States and Mexico. 90% of the corn in the United States is genetically modified, while Mexico has banned genetically modified corn specifically. Go Mexico. If you go to Chipotle, for example, you can get the natural corn Coke, because now they, instead of putting sugar, they put the corn syrup and stuff in it. But now they're going to file a complaint. It could start a big problem. Hopefully Mexico wins, because that GMO stuff is garbage. Investment news. China's President Xi is focusing on national security, where a lot of investors are starting to say that it's starting to affect their economic efforts. The government is also starting to stop publishing data of youth unemployment that hit over 21% in June. And now a lot of people are saying that the big crackdowns that they're starting to have, or continuing to have, I should say, is starting to affect the economy quite a bit. International events. The Maui fires, obviously, is Mr. Conspiracy Marcello. Conspiracy Marcello has a lot to say about that. But one of the things that is very unusual is that we got these crazy fires in Maui. We have these crazy fires in Canada. We have these crazy fires on the Spanish island of Tenerife, which is part of the Canary Islands. And we even have it in Greece. Now, if you ask me about this conspiracy theories, I think like intentionally starting fires is probably, or weapons or whatever, probably a really expensive way to attack people. So some of the people that I follow say that I'm not saying that there isn't any funny business, because I think there is, but there's something that's happening where you guys have probably noticed the freak weather too, where there is something, I'm going to call it something for now, is affecting the core of the earth. And that's why we're starting to see a lot of magma coming up. I've seen videos in Turkey and even in Mexico of just like the ground on fire under a tree. And so I think that's part of what's happening as well. It doesn't explain why they're all getting started at the same time, but stay safe out there, guys. We got the hurricane that's going to hit California. Hopefully all you guys are going to be safe. We got 3 or 4 that are coming against the East Coast in the United States as well. One of the things I thought that was really interesting about the situation in Maui is now the Hawaii governor reveals state plans to acquire the land in Lahaina, ravaged by the wildfires. And a skull that was found in China points to an unknown human species that may change the history that they try to teach us, because I don't think it's true, but it's a 300,000-year-old skull of a different type of human that could basically prove that there was a different kind of human living in China. China's fertility rate also was one of the world's lowest at 1.09 in 2022. And if they don't start having babies soon, they are not going to dominate the world. That's the news for this week, guys. Let me know if you guys have any questions. Don't forget to subscribe. And remember, the preppers were right.